My girlfriend screamed, "Your love sickened me," and labeled me a freak when I tried to hold her. Now she treats me like a stranger who no longer deserves her touch. My girlfriend screamed, "You disgust me," and something inside me died. I'm not sure it will ever come back. This was the same woman who once told me I made her feel safe. But in that moment, as I stood frozen, my entire world shifted, and I knew nothing would ever be the same. It was late, the air heavy with unspoken tension in our small apartment. The TV droned quietly in the living room, but the silence between us was deafening. I'm Noah, 28 years old, and for 2 years, I genuinely believed I'd found the one person who truly understood how I loved. I was wrong, so wrong, in ways I couldn't have possibly imagined. I've always been a touchy-feely kind of guy. Not in a weird or aggressive way, just natural closeness. For me, affection is in the small gestures, holding hands while walking, a hug from behind when she's cooking, running my fingers through her hair when she's tired, or a soft kiss on her forehead when she's deep in thought. That's my love language. It's just how I'm wired. And I never, ever thought it would be the reason someone I loved would call me a pervert. When I first met Chloe 2 years ago at a friend's birthday party, she seemed to adore it. She'd always smile when I pulled her close, lean into me on the couch during movies, even laugh when I'd randomly kiss her cheek as she brushed her teeth. More than once, she'd look at me and say, "I feel so safe with you." That made me feel like I was doing everything right. For that first year, everything was just perfect. It was that effortless kind of perfection where you don't overthink anything. We just fit. After 12 months, we decided to move in together. It felt like the most natural next step for two people who couldn't get enough of each other. Our apartment was small, but cozy. A single bedroom in a decent neighborhood, about 15 minutes from both our jobs. Those first few months of living together were everything I'd dreamed of. We'd cook dinner together, fall asleep talking about anything and everything, wake up tangled in each other. I felt like the luckiest man alive. I never pushed her. Never demanded anything. If she said she was tired, I backed off. If she needed space, I gave it. I really thought I was being respectful and attentive. But, looking back, I was apparently building up to something I utterly failed to see coming. Around month 4 of us living together, things started to shift. It was subtle at first, small changes I noticed but couldn't quite understand. Chloe's job got incredibly stressful. She worked in marketing for a startup facing major layoffs and restructuring. She'd come home completely drained, more exhausted than I'd ever seen her. She'd walk through the door, drop her bag, and just collapse on the couch, barely saying a word. I tried to help in the only ways I knew how. I'd cook her favorite meals, rub her shoulders, or hug her from behind while she scrolled through her phone. I wanted her to know she wasn't alone. But slowly, week by week, I felt her pulling away. Nothing dramatic. Just small things, turning her head when I leaned in for a kiss, tensing slightly when I'd put my arm around her, or giving me quick, one-armed hugs instead of the full embrace we used to share. I started second-guessing myself, wondering if I was imagining it. But every time I asked, "Are you okay?" or "Is everything all right with us?" she'd just say she was tired from work. So, I believed her. I kept trying to be supportive. The distance grew, though. We went from being intimate multiple times a week to maybe once every 2 weeks. And even then, it felt mechanical, like she was just going through the motions because she felt obligated, not because she truly wanted to. I kept telling myself it was just a phase, that work stress does this to people, that we'd get through it. But deep down, I started to feel rejected in ways I couldn't articulate. Then came the night that changed everything. And I mean everything about how I saw myself and how I existed in relationships. It was a Wednesday evening, nothing special. Chloe had come home late again, around 9, ate the dinner I'd made in silence while scrolling on her phone, and went straight to bed by 9:30. I gave her about an hour, watching TV alone, trying not to feel hurt by how disconnected we'd become. Then I went to bed too. She was already under the covers, facing away from me. We hadn't been close in days, maybe over a week. I just missed her. Not in a demanding way, just genuinely missed the woman I loved. So, I carefully slid over and wrapped my arms around her from behind. Just a simple hug, the kind we used to share every single night without thinking. She went rigid immediately. Before I could even ask what was wrong, she shoved my arms off and practically jumped out of bed, turning to face me with an expression I'd never seen before. Pure disgust, mixed with anger. She screamed, "Get away from me! You're disgusting!" I literally froze. My brain couldn't process what was happening. Then she uttered the words that have been playing on repeat in my head ever since, "You're a pervert. All you think about is that." I just sat there in our bed, feeling like I'd been slapped across the face. I managed to stammer out, "I'm sorry. I just wanted to show you I love you," but my voice sounded pathetic, even to me. She shot back, "Your way of loving me makes me uncomfortable," before grabbing her pillow and walking out of the bedroom. I sat there in the dark for probably 20 minutes, not moving, just trying to understand. I replayed every touch, every hug, every moment of affection over 2 years, wondering if I'd been violating her this whole time without realizing it. The shame was immediate and crushing, like concrete pouring into my chest. I felt disgusting. I felt like a creep. I felt like everything natural and loving about me was actually wrong and perverse. Eventually, I got up and went to the living room. She was already asleep on the couch. I grabbed a blanket from the closet and made a bed on the floor next to the coffee table. Not because I was angry at her, but because I was ashamed to be near her. Ashamed of my hands. Ashamed of my instincts. Ashamed of the way I loved. That night, lying on the hardwood floor of my own apartment, listening to her breathe on the couch above me, something fundamental inside me just shut down. Like a switch being flipped from open to closed. And even then, I knew I might never be able to flip it back. The next morning, I woke up on the floor with my neck aching and my mind completely numb. It felt like my brain had just shut down all emotional processing to protect itself. Chloe was already gone to work. She'd left early, around 6:30, without waking me. I spent the entire day moving through our apartment like a ghost, going through the motions of showering and eating, but not really present in my own body. When she came home that evening, around 7, we didn't talk about it. She acted like nothing had happened. Walked in with takeout she'd picked up, asked me about my day in this casual tone that felt insane given what she'd said to me less than 24 hours earlier. I just responded with basic answers because I genuinely didn't know what else to do. But something fundamental had changed in me. I didn't stop loving Chloe, not even close. But I completely stopped touching her. Every single time the thought crossed my mind to reach for her hand, or hug her, or do any of the 1,000 small affectionate gestures that used to be automatic, I'd hear her voice in my head screaming disgusting and pervert, and my body would just freeze. I became hyper-aware of every movement I made around her, constantly monitoring myself like I was some kind of threat that needed to be contained. I'd measure the distance between us on the couch, keep my hands visible and away from her, ask permission in my head before doing anything that might involve physical contact. I was still kind to her. Still cooked dinner most nights, still asked about her day, and listened when she vented about the chaos at her startup. I still did my share of cleaning and took care of things around the apartment. But physically, I'd built an invisible barrier I refused to cross. The weirdest part was that I started questioning everything about myself. Lying awake at night, I'd run through our entire relationship, wondering if I'd always been too much, if I'd crossed boundaries without realizing it, if my natural way of showing love was actually inappropriate, and I'd just been too blind to see it. I felt like I needed explicit permission just to exist next to her. Like my very presence might be unwelcome. And that's a horrible way to feel in your own home with someone you love. About 2 weeks into this new dynamic, Chloe started noticing the change. I could see the confusion on her face when I'd move away if she got too close, or when I'd give her space on the couch even though we used to sit pressed together, or when I'd sleep on my side of the bed without reaching for her like I used to every single night. She tried to joke about it one evening while we were eating dinner, saying something like, "You're being weird lately," with an awkward laugh. I just smiled and said I was tired, which became my default response to everything. Then she started initiating contact. It felt like some twisted reversal of our entire relationship. She'd hug me randomly when I was doing dishes, touch my arm when we were talking about nothing important, lean against me while we watched TV shows neither of us were really paying attention to. I'd respond, but it felt hollow. Like I was performing the role of an affectionate boyfriend rather than actually being him. The warmth that used to come naturally was just gone, replaced by this careful politeness that kept me safe from saying or doing anything wrong. One night, about 3 weeks after that incident, she sat me down on the couch with this serious expression. She said, "You can touch me again." I didn't mean what I said. And there was something almost casual about how she said it, like she was giving me permission to go back to normal. Like her words hadn't fundamentally altered how I saw myself. I nodded and said, "Okay." But inside, I felt absolutely nothing. Because apologies don't immediately heal shame, and permission doesn't automatically restore something that's been broken. The thing about shame is it becomes part of how you see yourself. It's not just about one moment or specific words. It's about this new understanding that something fundamental about you is wrong. And you can't just flip a switch and unlearn that. A few nights later, maybe 5 days after she'd given me permission to touch her again, Chloe tried to initiate intimacy. We were lying in bed around 11, and she started touching me in ways that used to drive me crazy, moving closer, making it very clear what she wanted. And I just lay there feeling completely disconnected from my own body. Nothing happened. Not because I didn't find her attractive anymore, but because my body had learned to protect itself by shutting down. And apparently, that protection system didn't come with an off switch. I quietly said, "I'm tired," which was technically true, but also completely inadequate to explain what was actually going on. I turned away from her, feeling her confusion and hurt radiating across the small space between us. She didn't push it, didn't ask questions. She just rolled over to her side, and we lay there in silence for what felt like hours, but was probably only 20 minutes before she fell asleep. The next morning was awkward in ways our relationship had never been before. We moved around each other in the bathroom like roommates who barely knew each other. I could feel her watching me, trying to figure out what had changed and why. This pattern continued for another couple of weeks. Her trying to bridge the gap that had opened between us, me politely deflecting and maintaining distance. Both of us pretending everything was fine while our relationship slowly died from lack of connection. I started spending more time at the gym after work, taking longer walks around the neighborhood. Finding excuses not to be in the apartment. Being around her meant constantly monitoring myself, and that was exhausting in ways I couldn't explain. My friends noticed something was off. One of my buddies, Liam, asked if everything was okay with Chloe and me during a basketball game one Saturday. I just said we were going through a rough patch, which felt like the understatement of the century. I thought about talking to someone, maybe a therapist, but I felt too ashamed to even articulate what had happened. Like saying it out loud would make it more real, would confirm that yes, my way of loving someone was disgusting and perverse and wrong. Chloe started getting frustrated with my distance. I could see it building in small ways, the edge in her voice when she'd ask me questions, the heavy sighs when I'd move away from her touch, the pointed comments about how we never did anything together anymore, how I was always at the gym or out walking. One evening, about 6 weeks after that initial night, we were sitting on opposite ends of the couch, both staring at our phones instead of the TV. I looked at her and felt this overwhelming sadness, not anger, just profound sadness that we'd ended up here. Two people who used to fit together so naturally now existing in the same space like strangers. I saw the confusion in her eyes whenever she looked at me, this unspoken question of what happened to the man she'd moved in with. And I wanted to explain that he was still here, just buried under layers of shame and fear and self-doubt that I didn't know how to remove. But I didn't say any of that. I just went back to scrolling through my phone, and the distance between us grew wider. I knew something was going to break soon because we couldn't keep existing like this, suspended in this weird limbo where we were together but not really together at all. The breaking point came on a Saturday morning, about 8 weeks after everything started falling apart. I was making coffee in the kitchen around 9, still in my pajamas, when Chloe walked in with an expression I'd never seen before, a mix of anger and desperation that immediately put me on edge. She didn't say good morning, didn't go through any of the normal pleasantries we'd been using to maintain the illusion that we were still a functioning couple. Instead, she just looked at me and asked, "Who is she?" I was so genuinely confused that I actually laughed, which was apparently the worst possible response. She repeated the question, louder this time. "Who is she, Noah?" And I realized she was serious. She actually believed I was involved with someone else. That the distance, the coldness, the complete shutdown of physical affection was because I'd found another woman. I sat down my coffee mug carefully and said, "There's no one, Chloe, there's literally no one." But she wasn't buying it. She started listing all the evidence, like she'd been building a case in her head for weeks, how I didn't touch her anymore, how I avoided being home, how I spent all my time at the gym, how I couldn't even look at her the same way, how I'd completely shut down in bed that night she tried to initiate. And according to her logic, the only explanation was another woman. I stood there listening to her lay out this theory that was so far from the truth, it would have been funny if it wasn't so sad. And something in me just snapped. Not in an angry way, but like a dam breaking. I told her everything I'd been holding in for 2 months. I told her how her words that night had destroyed something in me. How I couldn't hug her without hearing disgusting echo in my head. How I felt like a predator in my own relationship. How I'd spent 8 weeks questioning every natural instinct I had about showing love. How I couldn't even initiate intimacy anymore because my body had learned to associate my own affection with shame. I told her about lying awake, analyzing every touch we'd ever shared, wondering if I'd been violating her boundaries for 2 years without knowing it. How I'd become terrified of my own hands. How I felt like I needed written permission just to exist in the same space as her. The words poured out in a stream of consciousness I couldn't control, and she just stood there listening. I watched her face go through different emotions, confusion, realization, something that might have been guilt. But when I finally stopped talking and waited for her response, what she said made everything so much worse. "You're overreacting," she said. Not cruelly, but dismissively. Like my pain was some kind of dramatic interpretation of events rather than a valid response to being called disgusting and a pervert by the person I loved. She explained that she'd been stressed that night, that she didn't mean it the way it sounded, that I should have known she was just having a bad day and didn't actually think those things about me. With every word, I felt something inside me die a little more. I realized in that moment that my pain wasn't valid to her. That my love language being called perverted wasn't something she saw as a big deal. That she expected me to just get over it because she'd apologized and given me permission to touch her again. Like that should have been enough to undo 2 months of shame and self-hatred. I asked her if she understood why her words had hurt so much, why calling someone disgusting for trying to hug them might leave a lasting impact. And she said, "I get it, but you're being too sensitive." And that's when I knew, with absolute certainty, that I couldn't stay in this relationship. Not because I didn't love her anymore, but because I would never feel safe being myself around her again. The next few days were strange. We barely spoke, moving around each other like ghosts. I started quietly looking at apartments online during my lunch breaks at work, checking what I could afford on my own, making plans I didn't share with her yet. I called my brother, Liam, one night from my car after leaving the gym, sitting in the parking lot for over an hour. I told him everything, the whole story from beginning to end. He just listened without judgment, then said, "You can't live like this, man." He offered to help me move whenever I was ready. It made me realize I had people who actually understood that this wasn't about being too sensitive or overreacting. About a week after that Saturday morning confrontation, I made the decision. I found a studio apartment about 20 minutes away in a decent area, put down a deposit using money I'd been saving for a vacation we'd talked about taking, and gave myself a deadline to tell her. The night I told her, it was a Thursday evening. We were sitting at the kitchen table after dinner, and I just said, I'm moving out. No build-up, no explanation. I watched her face cycle through shock, disbelief, confusion, and then panic in the span of about 5 seconds. She immediately started crying, asking why, saying we could fix this, that she was sorry, that she'd do better, that she'd never say anything like that again. I felt terrible because I could see she was genuinely upset. But I also knew that staying would mean slowly erasing myself until there was nothing left. She begged me to reconsider, promised she'd go to couples therapy, asked what she could do differently. And I realized she still didn't understand that this wasn't about one night or one set of words. It was about the fundamental incompatibility between who I was and what made her comfortable. I tried to explain it one more time. I told her I couldn't be in a relationship where showing love made me hate myself. Where I had to constantly monitor and suppress my natural instincts. Where my way of caring for someone was treated as a problem that needed to be managed. She argued that every couple goes through rough patches, that this was fixable if I just tried. But I knew it wasn't. The damage was too deep, and her inability to understand why it was damaged in the first place meant we'd just end up here again. I spent the next week and a half packing my things while she alternated between crying, being angry, trying to seduce me, and giving me the silent treatment. It was exhausting and heartbreaking, but I didn't waver because I knew if I stayed, I'd lose myself completely. The day I moved out was a Saturday, 2 weeks after I told her I was leaving. She wasn't there. She'd gone to stay with her mom in the suburbs, saying she couldn't watch me leave. Honestly, I was grateful, because I don't think I could have handled a big emotional scene. I loaded my stuff into Liam's truck with his help. We made 3 trips back and forth to the new studio. When we were done, I took one last look at the apartment we'd shared, the couch where we used to watch movies, the kitchen where I'd cooked so many dinners, the bedroom where everything had fallen apart. I left my key on the kitchen counter next to a note that just said, "Take care of yourself." Because I didn't know what else to write. And then I walked out and locked the door behind me. Driving away in my car, following Liam's truck, I didn't feel relief or happiness. Just this heavy sadness, mixed with the smallest bit of hope that maybe, just maybe, I could learn to be myself again. It's been a month now since I left. I'm settled into my studio. It's small and quiet, all mine. Just one room with a kitchenette and a bathroom. But it feels safe in a way that apartment never did after that night. I'm slowly learning to exist without that constant anxiety about whether I'm too much or not enough. And I've started going to therapy, which I probably should have done 2 months ago, but I wasn't ready then. Chloe has texted me a few times, mostly apologies and requests to talk, to meet up for coffee, to explain herself better. But I haven't responded because I don't think there's anything left to say. I need this space to figure out who I am without shame attached to every instinct I have. I don't hate her. I really don't. And I hope she finds someone whose love language matches hers. But I learned something painful through all of this. Sometimes relationships don't end because love disappears. They end because one person realizes they're not allowed to love the way they are. And staying means choosing someone else's comfort over your own existence. I finally chose myself. And even though it hurts, even though I miss what we had before everything changed, I know it was the right choice. Because I'm learning to breathe again. What would you have done?